Once upon a time, their inhabitants used to battle against wind, waves, and isolation. Now they're harnessing the forces of nature to provide clean energy. Islands of the future. Role models for the whole world. The small volcanic island of El Hierro lies far out in the Atlantic off the west coast of Africa. For ages, the island wasn't to be found on any map, until geographers set the zero meridian here in the 14th century. A memorial marks the spot where a line of longitude once defined the end of the world. After that, little was heard of this southwesterly outpost of Europe. The island provides unique habitats for many animal species. The wealth of nature, the forces of water and wind, could soon place El Hierro at the center of the world. Ironically, it's one of the smallest of the Canary Islands that's using new energy concepts to attempt a great leap into a green future. But how's that going to work? The man floating down to El Hierro is Javier Morales. He was born in 1959 on the neighboring island of Tenerife, but spent most of his childhood on El Hierro. The unspoiled nature of the island has shaped his life.
Desde pequeño siempre vives en un pueblo, nuestra familia.
I grew up in a village amongst country people. Nearly all the families went fishing. That gives you a feeling for the sea and teaches you when it's worth going out fishing and when a storm is due, and whether it's going to rain or not. I grew up with all this. That's why our environment is so close and important to me today.
Javier Morales left El Hierro in the 1980s to learn more about agriculture on the Spanish mainland. He returned as an agricultural engineer, and in 1995 became a consultant to the government of El Hierro. His ideas were completely new to the sleepy island.
I
started to develop ecologically sound criteria for agricultural production on El Hierro and for sustainable fishing as well, for energy provision as a whole and for supplying drinking water.
When Javier Morales started working in 1995, oil tankers were regular visitors to El Hierro. They supplied the island's central power station with diesel. All the electricity at the time was produced from dirty fossil fuels. Javier Morales set out to get rid of the oil tankers and produce all the electricity for the island's 10,000 inhabitants using renewable, environmentally friendly energies. But for a remote island with no power cable to the mainland, his plan seemed far-fetched. He had to fight for 20 years to see his dream become reality. But the obvious idea of using the trade wind to produce electricity was greeted skeptically. The first wind turbine on El Hierro often stood still. It had been erected before the new consultant had started work. For Javier Morales, a wind turbine that's not turning shows that the energy transition is not going to work without good planning.
Los dos primeros aerogeneradores que se instalaron aquí en la isla.
This is one of the two wind turbines installed at the time. One was operated by the island's power provider, the other by the administration. At first, it was just for the street lighting. They wanted to switch to wind power to save money.
La posibilidad de ahorrarse un dinero importante, sobre todo del alumbrado público.
But it's long been decommissioned owing to technical problems and high maintenance costs. Nevertheless, Javier Morales still sees El Hierro's first wind turbine as a significant milestone on the way to a clean energy future. He already had a vision of what modern wind turbines could do for the island. Because El Hierro has wind enough. But wind power does have drawbacks. On windless days, the power network is under-provided. And when the wind is too strong, the electricity grid can overheat. Javier Morales set about finding a solution to these problems. Other islands in the Canaries had already gained experience of wind energy before El Hierro. Especially Gran Canaria. The third biggest island of the archipelago is about 300 kilometers away from El Hierro. Away from its famous beaches, this tourist island has another face to show. The capital of Gran Canaria is a modern European city with innovative commercial enterprises and research institutes. Gran Canaria is the location of the Technological Institute of the Canary Islands. Here, commissioned by the government, they're working on wind energy and on solar technology. At the moment, they're testing a hydrogen-powered electric car, driven by the research director, Gonzalo Piernavieja himself.
The Technological Institute of the Canary Islands conducts research in various fields of renewable energy, the environment, and biotechnology. We aim to increase considerably the share of renewable energy on the Canary Islands.
In the small town of Arinaga on Gran Canaria, the first wind turbines were already operating in the early 90s. Over the years, a huge wind park has grown. Well away from the flow of tourists, the local people have not only got used to the site, but are proud to offer something other than sun and sand.
This place provides a journey through time in the history of wind energy. We have several generations of wind generators and various technologies here. The first wind turbines were still quite small, but we also have the biggest in all of Spain here.
The wind parks on Gran Canaria are huge, but despite their size, they cover only 7% of the island's electricity consumption. The biggest shortcoming of wind power is that it can't yet be stored directly. It has to be used as soon as it's generated. Unlike Gran Canaria, El Hierro missed out on exploiting the powerful trade winds for a long time. The inhabitants of the small volcanic island had other, more urgent worries. El Hierro is bone dry, doesn't have any sources of fresh water of its own, and suffers from chronic water shortage. The dryness also makes it tough for livestock farmers, like Andrés Cabrera. Periods of severe drought have forced the inhabitants to leave their island home at various times over the centuries. Global warming could aggravate the situation still further. It's only since the 1960s that the Canary Islands have had desalination plants, turning seawater into drinking water for people and animals. The inhabitants of El Hierro still lead a drip-feed existence.
Water is life. That's no secret. Without water, there'd be neither land nor pasture. Thanks to the water, we can tend our sheep. Without water, they wouldn't be here. Water is the most important thing of all.
Fear of severe drought has become an enduring trauma for the people of El Hierro. The festive parade of the shepherds is dedicated to water. It's the result of an island legend, and islanders love their legends. It's said that seafarers presented a Madonna to the island inhabitants in gratitude for their hospitality. Miracles are ascribed to the revered figure in its wooden case. When the island again suffered severe drought, the shepherds carried the Madonna all the way to the island capital and prayed. And lo and behold, it started to rain. That was when the Madonna became the patron saint of El Hierro, and the occasion is celebrated every year by this spirited festival. At the end of the 1990s, the traditions and myths of El Hierro provided inspiration for Javier Morales. He was occupied with the question of how wind energy could be stored, and he came across one of the island's favorite legends. And it was this that set him on the way to finding new technical solutions. The Garroye was the sacred tree of the original inhabitants of El Hierro, and is the island's emblem. The actual miraculous tree no longer exists, but an impressive laurel tree still recalls the legend. With its fine branches, mosses, and leaves, the laurel tree is able to collect the moisture from the low-lying clouds driven over the island by the wind. Legend has it that a huge water reservoir had formed beneath the tree, large enough, it's said, to supply all the inhabitants of El Hierro with vital drinking water. The legend of how one pool was able to supply the whole island caught the engineer's imagination. Javier Morales wondered whether perhaps wind and water could be harnessed together to provide power, and started to sketch out some ideas.
Y el proyecto va dedicado a producir la
The
totalidad
project
de la energía
had
de
to
la
produce
isla,
electricity
no solo
for the
producir
whole
energía,
island,
sino almacenarla para
but
poder,
it needed to be able to
dar
store the
estabilidad,
electricity to
almacenarla, en
create
este
a
caso,
stable running
con
system.
agua en altura para dar
We could
estabilidad a
try
la
to
red,
do that
y
with
además de
water
producir
that we
energía,
collected
producir
higher
agua,
up.
porque en una isla es tan
For an island,
importante
it's as
ser
important to
capaces de
provide
ser
your own energy as it is
autosuficientes en
water,
energía, como
for the
ser
population
capaces de
and
producir
for
agua y disponer
agriculture.
de agua tanto para la población como para la agricultura.
Javier Morales still had no idea what the plant would look like. It took many days and nights before an initial concept for an ecological power station began to take shape. First, it was to be a wind park. When the rotors turned, there would be enough energy to pump seawater through a desalination unit and up into a highland reservoir. Then, when there was no wind, the stored water could be released to produce power in a hydroelectric station. But could such a system really cover El Hierro's daily needs for electricity? The engineer was now dependent on the support of experts. In 1998, he presented his idea to the energy researchers on Gran Canaria. An island supplying all its needs with green energy would be unique. Could Javier Morales' plan convince the experts?
As soon as we have a good idea in front of us, we first turn it into a proper concept. Then we simulate the technical process and calculate its efficacy. Our task at the Technological Institute is to work out various alternatives to arrive finally at the optimum solution, both technically and in terms of cost.
Apart from the technical side, there was another problem. The cost of the planned power station would be 65 million euros, way beyond the means of the small island. Javier Morales had to convince others with his idea. Oddly enough, in the search for investors, it was the operator of the diesel power station who proved cooperative. The energy enterprise was also interested in an alternative to expensive oil imports. A first ray of hope for the man with a vision, Javier Morales.
Si vamos a un modelo de energías limpias, puede haber decenas y decenas de pequeñas y
If we
medianas
once had
empresas
clean energy here, that could attract many small and medium-sized companies. That would bring investment to the island and create jobs and technical innovations. So money circulates on the island and creates many new opportunities. That means if we succeeded in creating a sustainable system, we would benefit both the people and the environment. We had the choice. Either we decided in favor of the environment and investment, or we continued damaging our environment and did without progress.
When news of the great plans reached the public, the response was initially skeptical, with good reason. A few years earlier, there had been another major construction project. The new harbour was intended to attract cruise liners, but it's usually just the diesel tanker that docks here. El Hierro is not a suitable island for mass tourism. Small, secluded bathing beaches are largely used by locals. There are no long white beaches on El Hierro. Unspoiled nature has its own attractions. People who come to hike or dive discover unique landscapes above and below the water. The coastline near La Restinga in the south of the island counts as one of the most spectacular diving sites in Europe. Underwater too, the volcanoes have created a wealth of diverse habitats. Niches for large sea creatures like the whiptail stingray. The end of its tail is poisonous, but no grounds for panic. Garden eels form colonies of thousands. Fish stocks are protected because the fishermen have agreed to catch quotas and closed seasons. The star attraction of any dive is the whale shark. El Hierro is one of the few places in the world where you can find them. Even though whale sharks are the world's biggest fish, they're not interested in large prey. They'd rather eat plankton than divers. To protect the diverse habitats and landscapes of the volcanic island, UNESCO declared El Hierro a biosphere reserve in 2000. For the island government, this entails particular obligations regarding nature conservation. The stock of groupers has recovered in the protected waters. Others have found fixed spawning grounds to which they return year after year. Even the mighty manta rays, with a wingspan of up to 7 meters, pose majestically for the divers' cameras. On land, too, the Biosphere Reserve is helping endangered species to survive on El Hierro. The giant lizard of the Canaries is threatened with extinction. It grows up to 75 centimeters in length and is only found on El Hierro. The last of their species live on an outcrop off the coast, safe from tourists and cats. Javier Morales was not the first person to be committed to nature conservation on the Canaries. The Spanish painter and architect César Manrique was a pioneer of environmental protection. He also made his mark on El Hierro. As an architect, he used natural building materials, which reflected the standalone character of the volcanic islands. La Peña is now a restaurant. What links Javier Morales and the eco-architect Manrique is their philosophy, not against nature, but with it. In 2004, Javier Morales started looking for a suitable site for his ecological power plant project. But he still hadn't found the funding to realize his plans. There are more than 1,000 dormant and extinct volcanoes on El Hierro. Farmers use some of these fertile craters for growing grapes and vegetables. Could he perhaps use a crater, if it was big enough, for storing water? But how would the reservoir be constructed? And what restrictions would nature conservation impose? Question after question. But there was someone who could help. Despite a population of just 10,000, the island has its own president. At the time, it was Tomás Padrón, who worked in the energy sector before his political career. Tomás Padrón also wanted to make the future more sustainable. Green energy became a top-level priority. The two engineers set about finding the location for the new power station that would combine wind and water power. Their excursion took them into the wild volcanic landscape of El Hierro.
Los parámetros que realmente permitieron hacer.
There were clear criteria the site had to meet. The wind turbines needed a location where the trade winds were especially strong, and preferably near the capital.
Localización de los aerogeneradores que estaban próximos a Valverde por el hecho de tener ese viento constante del alisio.
Best of all, would be right next to a volcano with a large crater and with as steep a gradient as possible. That was important for the hydroelectric project.
Pues eso era importante.
Javier Morales and Tomás Padrón were confident this landscape could offer them exactly what they needed for their power plant. When there was enough wind, the power it generated could pump desalinated seawater high up into the volcanic crater. When there was no wind, the stored water could be released to produce more energy in a hydroelectric power station below. But without further investors, it would all remain a pipe dream. Then suddenly the project received indirect backing from an unexpected source, the oil companies. Less than 20 kilometers off the idyllic beaches of the Canaries, energy concerns were prospecting for black gold. The test drillings approved by the Spanish government stoked fears of an environmental disaster. The oil rigs were serviced in the port of Las Palmas on Gran Canaria before being deployed at sea. The worries were shared by researcher Gonzalo Piernavieja. Like many others, he was concerned about the future of the Canaries as a holiday destination.
Bueno, el debate alrededor del petróleo es un tema muy candente y de mucha actualidad en estos últimos tiempos.
The crude oil debate stirred up emotions on the Canary Islands. Should there be an oil disaster, it would strike at the heart of our economy. The Canary Islands live from tourism. If our waters were ever polluted by oil, it would have catastrophic results for the whole population, especially on the islands of Lanzarote and Fuerteventura, which are especially dependent on tourism.
For years, the inhabitants of the Canaries have been protesting vehemently against offshore drilling for oil in Spanish and Moroccan waters. But before the millennium, the Spanish oil concern Repsol had discovered a number of large oil fields. In 2001, the Spanish government granted Repsol permission to drill. The Canaries could only be credible in their reaction to the seriousness of the situation by consistently refusing to import oil. A change of attitude was beginning to take shape in the minds of the islanders. The drilling off the Canary Islands was seen as especially risky. Immense forces could build up under the surface of the water. The area is volcanically active. Opponents feared that seismic movements underwater could damage drilling rigs and rupture pipelines. More and more people started calling for an energy turnaround. The researchers from the Technological Institute gained support from all sides. The construction of an innovative power station on El Hierro could provide the initial spark. Once the planned green power station had proved itself in simulation trials, Research Director Gonzalo Piernavieja was ready to risk the next step.
We
realize full well that the wind-water power plant on El Hierro was a springboard for transforming all our islands into an ideal laboratory for new sustainable energy.
At the end of 2004, the island government set up its own energy company, in which the Technological Institute on Gran Canaria was also financially involved. The company, Garona del Viento, was to build a power station of a sort never seen before. Would it really achieve what Javier Morales and his supporters hoped it would? Finally, in 2007, they were ready to start. It had taken over 10 years from the initial idea to the groundbreaking ceremony. The first phase of the project began with the erection of 5 wind turbines. They were so productive that they could supply the island's energy needs by themselves when the wind was blowing. Each turbine produced 2.3 megawatts of electricity. El Hierro's maximum consumption was around 8 megawatts. Theoretically, they could produce more power than was needed, provided all 5 turbines operated non-stop around the clock. Was Javier Morales' dream slowly coming true?
Que lo más importante es como ver que un proyecto como este se pueda.
It's fascinating to watch a project becoming reality, and at some point producing energy without harming the climate.
De manera respetuosa con el medio ambiente.
If everything works in the end, everyone wins. The environment, the people, and the economy.
The advantage for the economy wind energy is far cheaper than imported diesel. The island government therefore took a 60% share in the new power plant and would in future earn money from green energy. The advantage for the environment: if the power station really produced green energy around the clock, the atmosphere would be saved around 19,000 tons of carbon dioxide every year. The crucial question is, what happens if there isn't enough wind to guarantee complete energy provision? Gonzalo Pienavieja knew that the wind energy had to be stored. But could that be done in reality? Could wind energy be stored in the form of water reservoirs in volcano craters? Volcanic rock is porous. Without special preparation, the water pumped up from below would simply seep away in the reservoir. The idea was to prevent that with a huge pond liner. "700 meters lower, a second reservoir was to be created with a capacity of 150,000 cubic meters of water. More than 200 swimming pools put together. But the construction work was anything but easy. Some of the pipes couldn't be laid above ground as planned, but had to be laid inside the mountain. The costs soared by a further 20 million euros. Building work stalled. The plan was for the reservoirs to be filled with drinking water, provided from seawater via a desalination unit. Providing drinking water alone was consuming 45% of the island's electricity. In future, that was to be taken care of by the wind turbines. Before that could happen, the desalination plant had to be coupled with the power station, and that was a time-consuming job in itself. But it was not just a question of clean electricity. The 6,000 or so vehicles on the island also consume diesel and petrol and pollute the atmosphere. Even before the green power station was complete, Javier Morales was already planning the next step. Electric cars. They could tank up on green electricity from the new power station. The automobile manufacturer Renault was ready to provide some test vehicles. Vehicle drivers willing to switch to electricity were offered financial incentives by the island government. No exhaust fumes and no noise, a completely new driving experience. Hierro's president could not resist testing the island's first electric car himself.
El Cabildo del Hierro apostó por el coche eléctrico y dentro
The
de la
island government
promoción,
decided
al llegar
that
a
the
la isla,
president
el
would
primer
personally
ejemplar
demonstrate the first electric car and drum up publicity for us.
hacer la promoción.
The publicity rally did the job. The car fans of the island were surprised and curious. Up to now, the streets of the island have been dominated more by four-wheel drives and tractors. The president was confident that the colorful motor show in the center of the small capital would be a big mind changer.
People
were skeptical at first, but they gradually understood the enormous advantages these cars have for our future. We are certain that we'll be able to convert motor traffic on the island of El Hierro to electric vehicles completely.
For charging the batteries during journeys, 4 electric charge points were set up, though there's usually only one working at a time. The rental charge for the batteries is over €50 a month, which is by no means cheap for most islanders' pockets. The sobering result, just 9 electric cars were to be found on El Hierro. The island president, the chief supporter of Javier Morales, retired in 2011. But Javier Morales did not lose heart. He pressed on with his project. But at the next elections, he too lost his influential position. The project, though, had long since stopped being dependent on the fate of individual figures. He'd repeatedly had serious setbacks over the years. But this visionary never gave up hope that one day El Hierro would be able to do without fossil energies completely. His vision of a future dependent on sun, wind and water slowly spread throughout the whole island and had its effect. It encouraged some islanders to become proactive. Using solar panels to heat water for showers and baths. That saves electricity costs. One central power station combining wind and water power could in future mean savings for all the islanders. Before Thomas Padron retired, the island government managed to close all the gaps in the project financing. The pipes could now be installed through the middle of the mountain to link the upper reservoir with the lower one. Finally, the control center of the power station was completed. By early 2014, things were really moving. The first test run was looming. The wind and pumped water reservoir plant on El Hierro was the first of its kind worldwide. Would it really be able to provide all the island's energy needs around the clock? For the moment, the turbines were not turning. But Gonzalo Piernavieja had every confidence that the calculations of the Technological Institute would prove correct. Optimistic as ever, he was setting his sights on even bigger challenges. As the El Hierro plant neared completion, he was looking for new possibilities of combining wind and water power on Gran Canaria. Dams could make it possible to store wind energy, to supplement the wind parks that were already there. If that could be achieved, then even Gran Canaria, with its population of nearly 1 million, could provide all its energy needs exclusively from green electricity. The research director sees it as just a matter of time.
I'm convinced that we, too, can become self-sufficient with clean energy. Some islands will be quicker than others. El Hierro is already there. The smaller islands have it a bit easier than the large ones. By 2040 or 2050 at the latest, the whole archipelago of all the Canary Islands will have achieved it.
The Canary Islands have made an early start in developing their own strategies for ending their dependence on oil. But their experience can also be transferred to other islands, to other regions of the world. Spring 2014. The wind turbines on El Hierro are in the testing phase. If they produce more electricity than all the households and businesses on the island consume, they'll be able to operate the desalination plant and the pumps for the reservoirs. The moment of truth. Will the forecasts prove accurate? And how? The wind energy proves sufficient to drive the desalination plant and the pumps. For the first time, the upper reservoir fills with drinking water. Everything functions according to plan. The first tests run without a hitch. Then comes phase 2. When there's no wind, not enough energy is produced to supply the island with electricity. Now it's the turn of the reservoir. The water from the upper reservoir is released into the gravity pipes. On its way to the lower basin, the water passes through 4 turbines. They produce electricity from the water power. This bridges the energy gap when there's too little wind. Each of the 4 turbines has a capacity of 2.8 megawatts. The first trial run is a success. 60% of the target performance has been achieved at first go. On the 27th of June 2014, the power station on El Hierro is officially inaugurated, after over 20 years of planning and 5 years of construction. It's a dream come true for the project's initiator.
Bueno, es importante que un proyecto como este que ha llevado.
The most important thing now is not to rest on our laurels. We have to carry on working to ensure that this project, which has been 20 years in the making, brings benefits to all the people on the island.
Es importante seguir trabajando y avanzando para que esta realidad beneficie a todas las personas.
In addition, we should share our expertise and experience with other communities.
Donde podamos intercambiar conocimientos y experiencias.
The brilliant idea of storing wind energy in the form of water and producing drinking water into the bargain has turned El Hierro into an island of the future. The diesel-fired power station is now only used as a safety standby and will soon be history. Enthusiasm for the trade wind, which makes so many things possible on El Hierro, is something that Javier Morales has had all his life. He has learnt to adapt to conditions, to remain flexible, and to wait patiently for the right moment to launch. His commitment to the environment goes further. Since 2011, Javier Morales has represented El Hierro as a deputy in the regional parliament of the Canary Islands. His driving force to show oil the red card and to promote climate protection is undiminished.
Hace 15 años, el futuro de
In the past, we imagined the future of power generation and of oil very differently.
En aquel momento, pues cuando se apostó por una central como Gorona, era una
The decision in
apuesta
favor of a
firme y
green power
decidida
plant like
por
Corona del Viento has given the future a new direction. When you work on something like that, you get fresh stimulus and gain valuable experience. I believe it's right to push forward in this direction.
Apostando y trabajando en esa buena dirección.
Inspired by the legend of a miraculous tree, El Hierro itself has become an energy miracle. And the dream of the cars on the island no longer being fueled by petrol might also come true one day. Who knows? Perhaps some old saga will supply the brainwave for this as well. The EU wants to see the share of renewable energies in electricity production raised to 27% by the year 2030. El Hierro is already demonstrating that much more is possible. This small island was once the end of the world. Now El Hierro is the beginning of our future.